Well, thank you very much for this question. I would like to clarify from the beginning that civil society organizations, trade unions, and human rights monitoring bodies have been calling for a financial mechanism for social protection for more than a decade. So in 2008, after the global financial crisis, there's been this movement, particularly strong from human rights organizations where I come from. There's been calling for this. In 2008, for example, I was the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, and together with my colleagues, the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, we called for a global fund on social protection. If this call would have been taken seriously, the catastrophic impact of COVID would have been diminished, in particular in low-income countries. So this is not new. I think that COVID and the multiple crises that we're living in has brought a sense of urgency, and that is very important. So the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors started, which in his foundational meeting already in 2012, already supported a mechanism for financing social protection. And now after COVID, it has made statements really indicating what would be these minimum requirements for such a mechanism. And this, again, it's very important, and I would like to highlight some of this requirement very briefly. It requires, for example, the minimum requirement that civil society is calling for now is complete ownership by recipient countries of the social protection system. The involvement of national government in the decision on how funding allocation should take place, an inclusive governance mechanism, and this is extremely important, meaningful and effective participation, not only consultation, from civil society organization in the decisions of the funds. And also, and most importantly, to finalize, that any mechanism or the governance of any financial mechanism should be aligned with existing social security standards. And here I'm referring not only to the ILO, very important ILO Social Security Standard, Convention 102, and also the Recommendation 202, but I want to stress as well the human rights standards. The Universal Declaration for Human Rights, almost 75 years old, it's going to become in December, already states the importance of social protection. The right to social security is included there because we knew after the Second World War that social protection is the basis for inclusive and just society. And there are many international treaties that states have voluntarily assumed, such as the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, International Covenant, more than 170 state parties that enshrine the right to social security and many other rights like the right to health, the right to education, with very specific components. So these are critical. So we need to move ahead. We cannot wait for the next crisis or the next pandemic to strike. We need to be right now acting with a sense of urgency, and that is why this meeting is very important, and the leadership of Germany is also very important. We need to move ahead. We need to implement a financial mechanism with inclusive governance now in order to prevent the accumulative impact that people living in poverty and those who have increased the number of those living in extreme poverty are suffering now.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for sticking to...
There are many obstacles that are shared by several countries, and maybe I can summarize in three. One important one is the lack of obligations. And here what I'm referring is national laws obligations. And here what protection, privacy, equality laws. Those laws cannot be considered as an afterthought in the design of a social protection system. Our social protection systems are not gender equal, are discriminatory in access for many people in the countries. And now that we're talking about digitalization, well, data protection and privacy, if these programs are going to those living in poverty, we cannot, I mean, they're not receiving the programs and giving their privacy back. We have to respect their privacy too. So this is a common thing. I hope that in line, or at least in the rooms, there are more human rights lawyers like me, because the teams have to be interdisciplinary. We need human rights people designing, implementing, and evaluating this program. A second obstacle that it was already mentioned by Stefan in his presentation is the deep-rooted stigma against those living in poverty. And this is particularly clear when in the design of conditional cash transfer programs. A wonderful book that I will recommend, Just Give Money to the Poor, give already the evidence and good advice. We don't need conditional cash transfer programs that in most cases are limiting the time of women and are increasing their care and domestic work. So this is a wonderful idea. Let's put more conditionalities, but we're really in many cases impairing the equal rights of women to access the program. So, and this is about, it's an issue of political will. I mean, if we want to get the support of middle classes, we might need conditionalities, but it's also the role of the states to ensure that public policies are based on evidence and change the behavior of the societies. So, and this is a very important issue from a human rights point of view. And the third obstacles, to finalize, I will summarize it as the lack of coordination or harmonization within different institutions that are working on social protection. So within a government, sometimes Minister of Women's Rights or Social Welfare are less prioritized than Minister of Finance, or even the commitments made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs regarding human rights are not considered in the design. We also see that in many organizations, UN organizations, for example, and the same with international financial institutions, there is a lack of coordination. So many, I mean, the ILO, UNICEF, and others have already committed to a rights-based approach to social protection. To what extent everybody designing and implementing and provided technical assistance in this organization are aware of those commitments and the real implication of them. And also we know that sometimes there's been divergences in opinion or approaches between international financial institutions and UN organizations implementing social protection. So these have to be addressed. We need the political will. We need the increase in coverage of social protection systems everywhere. Those social protection systems need to be funded, and I'm going to clarify this point, mainly by domestic resource mobilization. Many middle-income countries do have the capacity to increase their fiscal space to do that, and they should do that. And this is the main difference between the MDGs and the SDGs. The MDGs were based on international cooperation. The SDGs give a lot of importance to domestic resource mobilization, and that is key. But there are some low-income countries that would not be in a position to expand the coverage and change specific programs or projects, as we have been discussing, into system if they do not receive international financial support and international technical support. And also for some middle-income countries, if they receive some international financial assistance that respect their ownership of the policy, then they will then be in a better position to mobilize their fiscal space and to convince their own citizens on the importance of social protection systems.
Thank you so much. Let me sort of expand from